All right, guys, part 2 in the series of those of you who are trying to shallow the club and suffering from shanks. Okay, so one of the things that we will see a lot is that golfers will try to get this club to drop to the inside at all costs. Meaning, unlike the first part where I spoke a lot about arm structure and wrist angles, the second part is going to be all about the pivot. And this is an issue that a lot of golfers will struggle with, which is where they create some sort of external station, like an alignment stick here, and trying to swing underneath it and so on. In many cases, that could actually help the golfer a lot. But there are scenarios where golfers will ensure that this club head drops to the inside of the hands, in many cases really late into the downswing as well, at any cost, meaning they completely compromise how the body is moving through the ball just to make sure that they're swinging more inside out. Now, why would that cause the shanks? Well, just like when you rotate the forearms too much to shallow it, it opens the face. Or if you externally rotate the trail shoulder too much to shallow it, it'll open the face. Well, unfortunately, compromising the way your body moves also opens the club face. Not only that, but because your body will no longer be rotating well through the ball, the club can get stuck way behind you. Everything exits way too far out to the right for a righty like me, so just outward in this direction. And that would lead to a lot of hosel balls as well, and the golfer will suffer from shanks. So what would that look like? Well, let's say in theory the golfer's setup is good, takeaway and backswing and all of that are good, so they get the club going up, on a good plane. The backswing structure looks pretty solid. But then from here, they have this tendency where the club obviously gets over the top. They're not worried so much about arm structure or wrist angles. They're just creating some generic station, like an alignment stick here, trying to swing underneath it. Well, what I'll see a lot of, and this is a lot of golfers who come to me on my lesson tee, is from the top of the backswing on the way down, they're just doing this to try to shallow the club. Meaning they're not really overly concerned internally into what's happening. They're just trying to avoid the stick, let's say in this example, and they'll do this. Well, in theory, if I keep this relationship alone, so the club being very steep in relation to my spine, right, wrist angles, arm structure, whatever, we're not too worried about it in this scenario. And all I'm going to do is just tilt my trail shoulder back a lot. And obviously when I do this, I'm now right side bending. Some amount is really good, too much is no good. The golfer will shallow the club. Like if I leave everything alone and I'm not going to move my wrists or forearms or anything at all, and I just tilt my upper body this way, I'll drop the club to the inside. Now the problem is I'll also drop my hands into the side of my body. The club is going to get stuck. And obviously from here, I have nowhere to go. So everything has to exit away from me. I can't like magically get my hands to work around me if I have no space, right? This is where the sensation of being stuck comes from. So sometimes it's even accompanied by too much lateral push towards the target. Sometimes it's just an upper body issue. It could also be too much early extension that creates that. But basically some form of a reaction from the pivot to ensure that the club drops to the inside. And in many cases, golfers don't even know they're doing this. Their only objective is to try to avoid a stick or something, which is why I'm not always crazy about just external objects to help. Of course, there's going to be some golfers who it's going to hit the jackpot. They're just going to do the right amount of something, and it's going to help them to shallow the club. In other cases, there's no insurance, let's call it, that the body will still move well, so they compromise that, and that's where they get stuck and trapped. And when I do this, hands have to exit away from me. When they exit away from me, the club is so far inside the hands and everything's pushing outward. Even if I try to square it up, the club head is going to be so much further away from my body, I'll hit it off the heel. So that would be one example of a golfer who's going to shank it quite a bit. And the other one is just what that pivot movement does to the club face. Let's take a very similar type of visual exercise like we did in the first scenario, part 1, right? Club face is shut. Let's say the club face is super shut at the top of the backswing here, right? So I'll exaggerate this. Well, if I'm here now, and then on the way down into this golf ball, I'm just going to tilt out of it a ton to ensure that I'm going to shallow this club without really knowing what I'm doing. Well, I'm going to take the face angle that's super closed, and if I do this enough, does this face angle look closed all of a sudden? Not quite, right? It's actually very, very open at the bottom. And again, if the club face comes in too open into the ball, there's no amount of this that can help you. Of course, you can just try to toe it maybe to help you, and you can use some sort of like skill-based exercise to help you avoid the heel. But every once in a while, it'll still cause you to hit it off the hosel part, right, the neck of the shaft, and the ball's just going to taper off to the right. So the reason why I'm having this explanation for you guys is to tell you that if you are going to shallow the club, don't just do it at all costs, right? And in this case, like the whole upper body tilting back, pelvis pushing towards the ball, not quite rotating, hands drop to the inside, and I'm stuck and I have nowhere to go with no space. Because if I do that, odds are I'm going to heal it a lot. Even if the arm structure in theory looks better, right? Like I can have external shoulder rotation, so that elbow pinching in front of me. I can have the wrist flexing. Everything looks good here. But if I'm doing that, and let's say the club is still a little steep, and then I tilt out of it a lot, I'm still going to end up healing it in many cases. So ensure that if you are trying to shallow the club, and let's say you're doing it through the hands and arms, right, or you're doing it through the hand depth you have, ensure that in transition you're not just doing this to help you drop the club to the inside, but that the lead side is still staying down and the body's opening up better while we're keeping this club in a shallow position. Obviously, that is hard to do. It requires a lot of steps. Just getting the club in a shallow position is obviously a bonus for many of you. But just ensure that you're not doing it by just kind of doing something crazy with the pivot, because if this is compromised, odds are your low point and your strike is still going to be compromised anyways, even if the club looks like it's dropping into a good position, okay?